thank you very much and welcome everybody and for joining Women for Solution webinar. We are proud to say that today it's our 125th webinar where we create awareness, connect, learn, and inspire to action, to reimagine and regenerate our world. I'm Laura Jadaru Koch, as founder of Women for Solutions, a global network of thousands of women entrepreneur in over 40 countries that seek to balance purpose and profits towards a more caring economy. And today it's all about caring for the environment. Our topic is zero waste living. How do busy people activate a lighter footprint? This is so important, and our amazing speaker, Stephanie Miller, she will really inspire. She has transformed thousands of people's mindsets into zero waste. And so you will hear something amazing. So a little bit more about who Stephanie is, because she has an amazing journey and why she's doing this. She's the founder today of Zero Waste and is in Washington, that focuses on the application of waste, on zero waste strategies that have a real substantial impact. With a goal of reaching as a wider audience as possible, she provides advisory services to individual households as well as communities and corporations. And for the last 25 years, she had a corporate career in the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. She served there as director for the IFC in Climate Business Department, where she led global teams to find initiatives and innovative solutions to climate change. So this is the deal. We are so lucky to have Stephanie here because she will actually share how from corporate she sees that we can actually create change from home as consumers. Stephanie, the line is all yours.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for everyone participating. Thank you for hosting me for this talk, and I've been learning about what Women for Solutions is doing, and I'm very inspired by your mission. Let me try to move into sharing my screen.
It's working.
It's working, and I realize it's not at the beginning. Just give me 1 second.
That's okay.
You get a preview.
Yeah, exactly. No big deal. I know what we're going to hear is very inspiring.
Let me start off with 2 facts. One, if food waste were a country, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it would rank 3rd after the US and China. Second fact, by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean. So a couple of years ago, I was not aware of these 2 facts. This was me a couple of years ago. This was me at a work conference talking on climate change, actually. I had always been attracted to a zero waste lifestyle, even before I was aware of what that meant. But for my entire adult life, I was busy. And I felt that I wanted to do more, to recycle better, to buy products that were good for the environment. But I never found a lot of time to do that. And I felt this way even while I was in charge of climate business for the International Finance Corporation, where it was my job to help governments and private sector get on a more sustainable path. But in my own life, I just didn't feel like I had time. I didn't really know where to start. And then a couple of years ago, I left this organization, IFC, that I'd been at for 25 years. I decided to take what I called a gap year. I was burnt out. I wanted to spend more time with my son, who was heading off to college the following year. And I found myself for the first time in my life with time on my hands. And so I turned my attention to, well, what could I do in my personal life to reduce my waste and my carbon footprint? And the first thing I did about a week after I stopped working is something that I'd been meaning to do for ages. And I can't really explain to you why I never found time to do it. But I'd always been bothered by all the plastic at the dry cleaners. I used to go once or twice a week to drop off my dry cleaning. And you see a typical picture here, my dry cleaners, all this plastic that my clothing I'd come home with my clean clothing in. And I did a little research, realized that 300 million pounds of this plastic from dry cleaners ends up in the landfill. So I finally got up the gumption to ask my local dry cleaner if they would put my clothes into a reusable garment bag that I had at home instead of in the plastic. And to my surprise, this was not a big deal. They said, yes, okay. So the next thing, a couple weeks later, I did some research and I approached them and asked if they'd be willing to start a reusable bag program for their clients to offer these reusable garment bags. And again, to my surprise, they agreed to pilot this, and the idea took off. And so now when you go into this local dry cleaners, this is what it looks like. This is the owner of the dry cleaners, Mr. Key. And about a third, actually, if you go in today, it looks even better. About a third of the garment bags, about a third of the customers now use these green reusable garment bags that you can see between the plastic. So that was really exciting. And it made me wonder, well, what else could I do? Because this was pretty easy. And it was about this time that I spoke with a friend who told me about the concept of zero waste living, this movement to reduce consumption and reduce waste. And it intersects really nicely with a lot of other initiatives and efforts that are out there, including climate change, because obviously the less you waste, the less is needed to be produced, the less energy is used, and therefore you've got the connection with greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So I embraced this. I read everything I could on the subject. Here are a couple of the authors of the first couple of books that I read. And you see something they have in common, which is that they're holding up a jar. And this jar represents for each of them a year's worth of their family's trash. That's it. They fit their entire year's worth of trash into this mason jar. So I was very inspired. As I said, I had a lot of time on my hands. I started doing all the things that they promoted in this book. Not all the things, but some of the things. I didn't start making my own shampoo, but I did start making my own household cleaner, you know, everything in an effort to avoid the waste, avoid, in this case, the plastic. So that was inspiring. It was sort of like man on the moon kind of goal, this 1 year's worth of waste in a jar. But it was also starting to feel a little bit daunting. I could sort of see on the horizon. I knew I was going to be going back to work in a year, and it was hard to imagine that I was going to be able to do all the things that I'd started doing to try to get to this elusive zero waste. In fact, I was getting nowhere near zero. I wasn't even I didn't even have this quantity in 1 week. It was a lot more than that. So I also thought about a work concept that we used to talk about all the time, this concept of the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that not all actions are equal, that there are some things you can do that will have more impact. And in fact, this rule of thumb is if you pick the 20% most impactful things you could do, you could make 80% difference. You could have 80% of the results. And we used to say in my business that we get, 80% of our business from 20% of our clients, or I used to complain that I spent 80% of my time on 20% of the staff. But you get the idea. It's not a fixed 80-20, but the idea is really focus on the things that are impactful. And it was about this time that I came across this book. Laura and I have talked about this book, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever to reverse global warming. I did a lot of other research, and then combined with this book, I was able to kind of piece together what might really make a difference. And what this book does is it comes up with a set of scientists that come up with 80 actions that could be taken at all levels, government, private sector, individuals, to reverse global warming. And one of the things that surprised me the most was that I just created this excerpt on the right-hand side of the slide to show some of these actions. Number one on the list, refrigerant management, very little that you or I could do much about. That's an industry and government issue. Wind turbines, that's an issue that really needs to be managed again by wind developers and government. But number three on the list, that really surprised me. Reduce food waste is number three on the list of things that could be done to reverse global warming. I had no idea. And what was even more surprising is that the majority of food waste is actually generated at the household level, not in hotels, not in grocery stores, not on the farm. They contribute too, but the single most important contributor to food waste is us at the household level. So that was eye-opening. That's not true, by the way, in all developing countries, but that's certainly true in developed countries. Plant-rich diet, also very high on the list. And then you look further down the list, recycling, composting. And I added, there is a section on plastics in the book, but that has a large climate footprint as well. So I looked at this and I basically came up with, well, if I'm going to try to marry the idea of the 80-20 rule and try to think with where I can have the impact and what is easiest to implement, I came up with what I call my magic three. And these are the magic three for me. Focus on food, purge plastics, and recycle right. And so I wrote this book, Zero Waste Living the 80-20 Way, because I wish that the busy person that I had been 2 years earlier knew what I knew now, which is that I don't have to do everything. I don't have to be perfect. I can actually make a huge difference in terms of my waste and my carbon footprints by focusing on these really important things and easy things. So let me go into the magic three a little bit more. The first one, focus on food. So as I mentioned, this was one of the surprising aspects for me, figuring out how much could be done at the individual level to reduce the issues around food. So the first thing is not I think all of you will agree, is not a very surprising thing. The idea of a plant-based diet. So for those of you who are already vegetarian, my hat's off to you. I am not a vegetarian, but I have my goals based on the 80-20 rule. So I try to make sure that in this household where meat was the center of every dinner, that we are now trying to get 4 vegetarian meals at the dinner table every week. That's my goal. I would love to get closer to becoming a vegetarian for all kinds of reasons, health as well. I find I post on my Instagram and Facebook sites every time I do a great vegetarian dish, and I find these are my most popular posts. I've also started running what I call a vegetarian cook-along to try to get other people to do what I'm doing, which is try to expand my repertoire of great, easy vegetarian meals. So if any of you are interested in joining me, I'd be delighted. So this is a picture of one of the easiest meals, vegetarian meals I make. This takes about 20 minutes, and everybody in this house loves this meal. It's called one pot spaghetti with cherry tomatoes and kale, I think. So plant-based diet, not a big surprise, but what was an interesting thing to realize is that it's not black and white. It's not that you've got meat on one side and vegetables on the other. There is a hierarchy in terms of carbon intensity of foods that we can choose to eat. So this table is an adaptation. I have this in my book. it's showing the carbon intensity of different types of common food. So for example, at the top, you see beef. 1 kilogram of beef is associated with emissions of 60 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's not a huge surprise that that would be at the top of the list. But I think what is surprising is you go down, I think 7 items down is chicken. Chicken is responsible, 1 kilogram of chicken for 6 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions. So 10 times less than beef. So you don't have to go all the way to vegetables. It's much better if you do, to really have an impact at your very next meal that you choose to have for lunch or tonight at dinner. Then if you move down to, wild caught salmon, that's half again of chicken, only 3 kilograms. So what this really showed me is I have a choice to make every single day. And, again, in the spirit of 80-20, I'm not a big believer in lecturing anyone, and I don't like to be lectured to, but I think it's nice to know that you can make a really big difference by making some of these other choices. So now, let me move to food
What is
waste.
really surprising is that chocolate is up there.
Yes.
Coffee is up there.
I
Wow.
mentioned in the book that chocolate and coffee were disturbing to see them so high in the list. But of course, most of us don't consume a kilogram of chocolate or coffee. So that gave me a little bit of comfort to know that, okay, maybe if I have a little bit less, that would help. But yes, chocolate and coffee are very carbon intensive. So yeah, that's a tough one for me, especially, and maybe for you too, Laura. By the way,
I'm actually vegan, so I do, but I only have chocolate, no coffee. So I'm surprised with olive oil. Olive oil, I have a lot of olive oil.
Yes,
So anyway,
yeah.
I'm gonna
Yes,
have to.
and I do too. And again, I think it's, not every choice has to be made to, you don't have to eliminate these things, but it's interesting that it's not all meat at the very top, right? It's also some other things that are not meat. Someone asked me, I don't have it on this illustration, but lentils is just under 1 kilogram. It's basically where peas are, 0.9 kilograms. And we've been eating a lot more lentils. Last night we had a vegetarian meal with fava beans, so I would imagine that's about the same.
Yeah, that's my main source of protein, lentils. So
yes, and it's a great source.
Yes.
And it definitely passes all the tests on this chart. So this is about plant-based diet, and not necessarily, it's, if you're vegan, that's fantastic, or vegetarian, fantastic, but starting to get a sense of where you can make a difference. I want to then move to food waste. And I spend a bit of time in the book talking about a few actions that we can take to reduce our food waste, because you remember that's the highest one up there on that drawdown chart where we as individuals can make a difference. One of the things that I recommend is developing a bit of a strategic partnership with your fridge and your freezer. And so this is a picture of my fridge, of our fridge on a good day. This is not what it looks like right now, I can tell you, because I was just there. But the idea of the strategic partnership with the fridge is that you want yourself and anyone in your household to be able to open the fridge and see what they need to know to eat the things that are in there that will go bad most quickly. If you've had leftovers for 2 days in a row and you don't want to eat the same meal a third day in a row, that's where the freezer comes in. You can freeze it. But it's so what I recommend is a 2 to 3 minute daily fridge review. And the purpose of the fridge review is to bring forward whatever is going to go bad soon and make sure you have a plan for how you're going to eat it soon. I put a little sign, you can see, eat me first, and that kind of alerts everyone else in the house that if they're going to go for a snack or a meal, that's where they should look first. This action alone has drastically cut our amount of food in the trash every single week. I mean, we noticed a difference right away from doing this. And the other reason it's really important to get the food waste piece right is that when food ends up in, besides all the waste of the energy that went in to produce that food, that's not going to people who might need it, when food waste ends up in the landfill, which is where most of it does, it is a very large contributor to methane. And methane is the greenhouse gas, which is one of the most potent, much more potent than carbon dioxide. And so the last topic I'll talk about with respect to food has to do with composting. And here's a little video illustration. This is not me, but the idea of there's some food waste that is obviously cannot be avoided. Your peelings from, as you see here, from vegetables and fruits, your banana peels, your chicken bones if you eat chicken, those sorts of things cannot be avoided altogether. So it's important, if you can, to find a way to compost the things that can be composted. And I started composting a couple of years ago. We started off doing this through a service because I'm not a green thumb, I'm not a gardener. I felt, even though we have a house with a backyard, I was very uncomfortable about the idea of doing this technical composting thing. So I used to do exactly what you see in this video. I used to collect my scraps in a little bin, and then once a week I would pay $8 a week to have a service come and pick up my compost, and it felt great. I was happy to spend the money on it because, you know, again, it immediately drastically cut the amount of things we were putting in the landfill, ultimately in our garbage. But it was also great to know that I was specifically avoiding the methane from all of these vegetable and fruit scraps. After a while, I got up the nerve. Well, actually, a friend helped build a compost bin. This is me in front of our backyard compost bin. And I realized then there was nothing for me to be afraid of. It's actually very easy to compost. I mean, I won't go through a tutorial on it now, but you don't need a tutorial. It's essentially, you need a space and you need to put your vegetable scraps in. And for every bucket of vegetable scraps, you have to add, as I'm doing here, some browns, as they're called, which are usually leaves. It can take other forms as well, like coffee grounds or whatever. But the idea is you've got the heat and the air and moisture working together to break down the vegetable scraps together with the browns, the leaves, and you end up, depending on how hot your system is, how much sun you get, you end up with compost soil, which is an amazing thing. And if you don't garden, you can give it to all of your gardening friends and they will be very happy with you. I'll stop there that's the end of the food section. Laura, I can take questions now if you like on that, or we can move on to the second of the magic three, which is purge plastics. Should I move forward, or are there
We can
questions?
ask the audience if there's any question they have. They should introduce themselves and maybe just say it out loud, or they can write it on the chat. I don't see anybody writing on the chat, but maybe what you can, regarding food, you know, I know there are more than 800 million people in hunger. So it's not only, you know, waste of food, but also there's a lot there. And you worked for the IFC. So have you done any thoughts of how you can combine what you're bringing in to save waste of food into helping hunger?
So there's a lot of work that's being done on that at the World Bank. I've seen some recent studies out of the one of the departments that's looking at agriculture at the World Bank. The food waste issue is huge. It's not as big an issue, as I said, in developing countries. People are much better at figuring out what to do with their food scraps, but that's true at the household level. You still get a lot of waste along the whole supply chain. And I mean, there are lots of programs and initiatives that are being done to try to increase the refrigeration, for example, from transportation from the farm to the retail or farmers markets, because obviously there's a lot of wastage that happens on the way. But I've read a study that essentially if we reduce our food waste dramatically, we could feed the world. So it is worth trying to get this right. This is not something I think, if most of what I'm focused on right now is what we can do at the household level, this is, less something that can be done at the household level. But there was a great talk that I saw at the World Bank right before the pandemic actually hit. Was a panel. I don't know if you've ever heard of dumpster diving, but I had never heard of dumpster diving. Apparently, there's so much waste in the US at least, and I think in a lot of developed countries, that there is a practice. If you're not disgusted by this, I will describe it to you. There's a practice where some people go and they go into dumpsters and they pull out the food from there that hasn't even been opened. There is a whole, for lots of reasons, not worth going into right now, there is a whole institutional issue around retail stores getting rid of their excess, and why they have excess to begin with is an institutional problem as well. So there was someone on that panel who also represented, I don't know how many of you are in the US or in DC, but there's a very nice NGO which works with institutions to take their food waste and immediately find a new home for it. So I tried to volunteer for that just as the pandemic was happening, and it was quite challenging. But those are the sorts of things we could do as individuals. Most of those problems, though, need to be solved at a different level with the private sector and with government regulation. There are regulations now on the composting side that are being introduced all the time. There's one in DC that requires food establishments like hotels and restaurants to compost their food waste. So that's a good thing. There's no requirement in the US for individual households to compost, but that's at least happening at some levels.
That's fantastic, especially restaurants. They have so much waste and they can really repurpose their food in many ways.
And some of them are very good at figuring out how to build that into their planning for their meals for the week.
There is a company, just to mention, there's a company in London, I don't remember their name, but they use waste to produce their beer. And there's other companies that use waste to produce their own electricity. That's a hotel in Costa Rica. So, there's creative ways of repurposing waste, but mostly
yes, absolutely. There's some
not at home.
Yeah.
So I think we should start something there.
Yeah. I'd be happy to come to a talk on that. It's a fascinating area. Any other questions on food, or do you want me to move into the plastics area?
Go into plastics. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So what I found is that, well, let me just say there are various issues with plastics, right? Plastics is a climate problem. There is, the statistics around this are that we're expected to grow 4 times what we are doing today in terms of plastic production, and that by 2050, that will be responsible for almost the equivalent of 300 million cars. So it's huge. The issue with plastic is not just around climate. The issue with plastic is also around emissions. People who live near the plants that convert fossil fuels into plastics produce at least 3 kinds of carcinogenic, hazardous air pollutants. So it's terrible for the people that live around those factories. And then, of course, I gave you the statistic at the beginning around marine pollution. Those are things we see. they're now finding microplastics, you know, the large plastics that break down into tiny pieces. They're finding these in placenta now. They're finding them in the deepest parts of the ocean. But even if you don't look at the ocean, that's the easy kind of image that we have of the plastics problem. There, 1/3 of plastics produced ends up in the ecosystems. And you might wonder why that is, but you know, we put a lot of plastic, you know, with good intention into our recycling bins. A lot of that doesn't make it into the truck. It blows away. Even as the trucks are pouring it into the bins, into their trucks, very light things that shouldn't even be in the recycling, our recycling bins end up flying away. They go into the gutter system, which ends up, you know, in our rivers and in our oceans. So plastics is a health issue. It's a marine pollution issue. It's a climate issue. It's really hard. When I talk to people, they say, what can I do? I'm just one person. I don't understand what I can do. And this is the advice I give. The advice I give is pick one thing. What I mean by that is, for me, it was my, when I used to go into the office, and Bridget, who's on this call, probably remembers, I like to drink a lot of water. I used to buy probably 2 plastic water bottles a day. It was a terrible habit, and I had all sorts of justification for it at the time. I was busy, I was thirsty between meetings, whatever it was. But my point is, pick one thing, find a non-plastic packaging alternative to it, and there almost always is a non-plastic alternative. Make a commitment that you will never buy that one thing that you buy frequently in plastic again, and stick to it. And my hypothesis around this, at least it's worked for me and some other people I know, is that once you make the commitment, then you are more conscious, and it becomes a gateway to consciousness about all the other single-use plastic that's in your life. So actually, here's another little video. Yeah, so this is not me, but I'm very proud also of my non-plastic water bottle. But I'm going to just show you a few other things that I use. So this is I created this for a friend. This is what I call a non-paper towel system, and I have mine here. It doesn't look as pretty because I have some rags in it, but basically this is a washcloth that I use instead of paper towels. Everyone in the household knows about it. We use it once, just like you'd use a paper towel. And when we're done with it, we put it in a bin under the sink, and then we throw it in with our laundry. So that avoids the paper waste, which is also a big problem, as well as the plastic wrap that comes around the paper towels when you buy them in the store. I also, I have a lot of allergies. I used to use boxes and boxes, I'm not kidding, of Kleenex every week. Again, if you buy enough boxes, they come wrapped in plastic, plus the tissues themselves are waste. So now I go back to the old-fashioned handkerchief. I keep this bin by my bedside. That's how I avoid that. Produce bags, the plastic produce bags in the grocery store. I have a couple of dozen of these cotton reusable plastic, non-plastic produce bags, and I use these to put my apples, to put my vegetables, and so forth. So there's lots you can do, and I think my point about the pick one thing is, I think once you start to open up your mind a little bit to all the plastic that is actually in your life, the single-use plastic here, I'm not talking about plastic medical equipment, for example, then you start to want to figure out what else you can do besides that one thing that you decided on. So I'll give you a couple of other examples I have of ways to avoid packaging, including plastic packaging. So a lot of people buy their milk, their dairy, their orange juice in plastic containers. When I started figuring out, I don't have dairy, but my partner does, and we were going through so many of these containers a week. So I found a local, for those of you who live in the DC area, a local place that delivers milk, like the old milk delivery system. They deliver milk once a week. They came last night and delivered our milk in glass containers. And then when you're done with the milk, you put the glass bottle back into this bin, and they take it and they wash it and they refill it for the next customer. And a very similar concept, which I love, that came out a couple of years ago. I'd be interested to know if any of you have heard this, is called Loop. Loop is you have, oh, that's great. Loop is a company that was created out of another company called TerraCycle, which recycles hard to recycle items. And they basically do the same thing as the old milkman, but they do it for consumer products that normally would come in plastic. They're not single use, it's things like shampoo or detergent. But you know, after you finish it in a few weeks, you have to toss it into the recycling bin, assuming it's recyclable. So here you see the Loop tote, where I order my shampoo and conditioner, and you can see some of the items on the right. I don't do it every week. I don't even do it every month, but I get it. I get the stuff, and now I never have shampoo and conditioner and detergent ever again in plastic. They do the same thing.
Ice cream and other
Ice
products.
cream. My favorite thing before the pandemic, I'm not too much of a show off, but was to bring out these stainless steel Haagen-Dazs ice cream things when I would have guests over for dinner, pre-pandemic, right? But it's so elegant, you know, and it's cost the same as Haagen-Dazs ice cream in the grocery store.
There's a question here by Hadia, and it says, how about the number of times something has to be reused to make up for the impact of plastic? Also, have you considered the pollution caused by the heavier glass, wood, etc.?
Yes.
Those two questions, yes.
Yeah, no, those are really good questions. So so this kind of system avoids, I mean, they guarantee that this company, for example, guarantees that they are reusing or able to use their container 100 times. It's probably more than that. Stainless steel will last for a very long time. The thing with plastic is, even if it's recyclable, and we're going to get to the recycle right. Actually, let me go ahead and move to that. But the second, I just don't want to forget, the second question was around the transportation, I think, of heavy items.
Yeah.
Glass and wood, how much?
Yes. Yeah, well, wood, there's nothing that I purchase in wood that's a container that I can think of, but glass is obviously heavy to transport. Let me move to the recycling point, and I promise I won't answer your question, but I think it'll be helpful to give a little context. So the third of the magic three is recycle right. Again, it's an important piece of the puzzle in terms of climate, in terms of energy use. I also have a theory about recycling, that same thing is on the purge plastics. If you open your eyes to what you're actually putting in your recycle bin, you end up perhaps wanting to change some of your habits. So let me show you a bit of a noisy video that I took when I was embarking on this zero waste journey. I visited every single recycling facility in my region that would allow public tours. I visited some of them twice, and it's a cool thing to do. And here's some video footage that I took of one of the visits. It's a bit noisy, but can you hear me? Okay, I'll move on. I'll stop this then.
No, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, you could. Okay, well, this is basically the assembly line at one of the recycling facilities, and you can see they get all this stuff from our bins. They sort it into essentially 4 different categories. They sort it into plastics, two different kinds of plastics. They sort it into glass, metals, and then paper and cardboard. So 4 things. And so these people work, their shift, sorting all the stuff that we throw in. And then for the things that are there are lots of things that don't belong, so they pull those things out. You can't see it in this picture, but there's a whole section for trash that ends up, even though it was sent to the recycling facility, unfortunately ends up in the landfill because it was improperly placed there. And then they've got lucrative things they can sell. The metals are very quick turnaround. You put a can of dog food in your recycle bin, within 60 days, it is melted down and recreated as a can, and it's back on the shelf. Though metals and glass are infinitely recyclable, paper and plastic are not. Paper can be recycled 7 to 9 times, but then the fibers get too short and it can't be recycled. Plastic, I've heard 2 to 4 times. So even when you do the right thing, you put it in the bin, it ends up in the right place, it's still going to only be recycled another once or twice.
So can you repeat that metals can be recycled in eternity?
Yes, metals and glass, infinitely recyclable. And the amount of energy savings from recycling metals is huge. I mean, the virgin materials that we avoid, the mining, the transportation, when you recycle something is, I have the statistics I give in my book, is very, very impactful. Now, glass, there's a mixed story about glass, but I want to answer the question that was just asked. My philosophy about glass, I love glass. I love the beauty of glass. I loved when I found out it's infinitely recyclable. Unfortunately, if you're in the US, it's not often recycled because of exactly the point you're making, or the question that you're asking. Glass is very heavy and therefore costly to transport. And so if you're having to take glass a very long distance away, for example, to a glass manufacturing facility so that they can use the glass as a raw material, it becomes uneconomic. So in the DC area, it is uneconomic in most cases to transport the glass to a to a glass manufacturing facility. In Europe, that's not true. In Europe, the glass manufacturing facilities are closer together, and therefore from almost any waste site, they can transport the glass effectively. So going back to your question, the way I think about the milk in plastic bottles is the guy who's delivering these bottles would be doing his delivery anyway. I don't think that in his truck, and he's not going a huge distance, he covers a certain neighborhood. I don't think it's a big enough difference to account for all of the climate impacts of using a different material that ultimately ends up in the landfill, like plastic. So one of the other things, and I'll try to move a little more quickly because I want to make sure I leave time for questions, and I see it's already 10 to 3. So one of the things I recommend doing, especially if you're in North America, is I say that because I don't know recycling systems, for example, in South America, but I recommend doing a recycle bin audit. This sounds like a big fancy thing. It's really just separating just do it once. You take your recycling for the week, you put it out on a big tarp or towel, and you separate it into the 4 categories that I described they sort it out into. And the purpose of this is twofold. One is to understand, are you putting the right things in the recycle bin? Because there is a price to be paid, unfortunately, if you get it wrong. Certain things, it's okay, certain things not okay. If you put a plastic bag in the recycle bin in the US, that will most likely muck up the machinery where they sort, and that can close down the facility for hours. So there's some mistakes it's really important not to make. So you do this audit, you do 2 things. You get your local regulations, and it's usually just a flyer, a poster on 1 page, and you look at it and you make sure there's nothing in your bin that doesn't belong there. But the more fun thing I think about doing this audit is you start to see where your issues are, meaning you look at this and you say, well, Metals, infinitely recyclable. That's great. I look at this and I say, this is there's nothing to change about the metals, but plastics, if you look back in 6 months, I did this audit for someone nearby. We came up with some recommendations for what she could do to drastically reduce her plastic that ends up in the recycle bin every week. And she has managed to do that. It's very impressive. I'm going to move on. So this is an example of something that doesn't go in the recycle bin. The top part can go in. The bottom part, I bet a lot of you are seeing a lot more of these during COVID, you know, this takeout container from your restaurant. The black plastic may have that little triangle on the bottom with a number that is not meant for consumers. It's a signal to manufacturers about what the contents are of that plastic. That has a little triangle on it. It's not recyclable. Why? Because these recycling facilities have an infrared identification system and they can't see black and brown. So this will end up in the landfill, unfortunately. Here's an alternative I found. This is my favorite Chinese restaurant now takes our containers and we arrive a few minutes early. They fill it with our food and we take it home. Even during the pandemic, they've been willing to do that. So now I'm going to move quickly to the last section, which is on, let's say you do these 3 things that are easy and impactful. And then you start realizing not everyone in your life is doing them. What can you do and what kind of influence can you have? And what's been really exciting, especially as I was researching the book, is how important social norms are. We model behavior every minute of every day when we are either on social media and I know Women for Solutions has done a great job of posting some really easy daily actions that can be taken. This sort of thing, when you normalize these behaviors through social media, it's huge. You can also, so let me just comment on why this is so important. This is a picture of a hotel room. You've all seen when you used to go to hotels before the pandemic, these signs that say, you might choose to be green and hang up your towel after you use it. It's good for the environment. There was a study that was done about a decade ago that showed that 26% more people choose to reuse their towel, not because they are told it's good for the environment, but because they're told the majority of other guests in the hotel did the same thing. So we are social animals. We do what we think is the right thing. We do what we think other people do. And that is a powerful thing to realize, that every step you take, the things you say when you're in the coffee shop, the requests you make at the Chinese restaurant for your own takeout containers are modeling behaviors, and they really can make a difference. I post on social media a few times a week because I'm trying to show people, well, this crazy thing I did, you can do too. Some of it is not so crazy. I try to support companies that are doing the right thing. This is a company called Plastic Tree, which is operating in the DC area, that is actually taking the concept of reuse to another level. So, you know, you've got reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is last, right? Reuse is really important. But how many of you can reuse this many egg cartons? Right? What are you going to use them for? Even if you've got creative kids in the house that can do art projects. This woman collects reusables for a small fee, and she finds them a new home. And I'll end with this quote from one of my favorite bloggers, the Zero Waste Chef, Anne-Marie Bonneau. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. And these are the words I've tried to live by the last couple of years. I'll stop there because I really wanted to leave time for discussion, but clarifying anything that would be helpful.
Well, thank you very much. This is very instrumental and also very interesting, because you really focus on 3 elements and say, let's make it happen. And you are inspiring people to say, okay, just choose one or do one thing well, like get your don't buy plastic bottles, water bottles, just refill your usable one. So I have a question here that what has happened with reusables during pandemic?
Can we still bring, say, a reusable coffee mug or in a coffee shop? How is the pandemic affecting zero waste? Because I think zero waste was easier before the pandemic.
You're absolutely right. So, you hear stories. I think I saw one today about carbon emissions dropping dramatically in 2020 because fewer people were traveling mostly. Plastics have gone the opposite direction. Plastics have really spiked because of the pandemic. So it's terrible. It was much easier before. What I would, so one thing is hygiene and concern about safety. And, the pandemic, all the restrictions came in March. In June of 2020, 125 health professionals came out with a statement that said, plastics are not more dangerous than any other material. Plastics are not safer than any other material in terms of catching the virus, right? I mean, in fact, plastics sometimes hold the virus, they've shown in tests, more than other materials. So this notion that I think the plastics industry has fueled, which is that, oh, you're safer and surfaces are cleaner if you don't use reusables anymore. It's just not true. The important thing, oh yes, I can stop. Yeah, thank you. The important thing is to wash your hands after you touch something that someone else has touched. It doesn't matter that it's been in a reusable cup or in a plastic water bottle. It just doesn't matter. So the answer, I would say, is some restaurants, some coffee shops are still not comfortable going back to reusables, and some are. And my philosophy is always, you don't know if you don't ask. So, my recommendation is go in and say, oh, are you guys now okay if I bring in my own coffee mug, or, fill in the blank, whatever it is. Even during the pandemic, as I said, I've been getting my takeout when we don't cook at home in my reusable containers. And they have never given me a hard time about it. There are 3 different restaurants we go to, and they're all fine with it. So I think you have to ask, is the moral of the story.
Thank you. That's a great answer. It gives you a lot of hope, because I think there's a possibility of re-going back to our normal soon. So you've worked in the IFC, you've dealt with governments and how governments have affected companies. And we've seen that in the Copenhagen Climate Summit 2019,
2009, yeah.
Yeah, versus the Paris Agreement that came in 2015. There's been a huge shift in governments. But government action, have really companies been also pushed into that direction? What have you seen in the last few years since the Paris Agreement that really should be waking up, or should all of the consumers and maybe vote for the purchasing the products of companies that are really doing the right thing? Because I always say, every time we buy something, we are voting for the world we want to live in. So
I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, absolutely. The choices that are made at these large climate conferences trickle down, right? The agreements are made, in Glasgow, there'll be another agreement, hopefully, but the Paris Agreement was huge, and hopefully very soon the US will rejoin it. Agreements made there mean countries it's not just a number, we're going to reduce by this amount of fossil fuel energy by 2035 or 2050. These are numbers that have to be actually implemented. They have to get to these. And so what ends up happening, for example, in the renewables sector, is you suddenly have governments all over the globe making these commitments and translating those commitments into requirements, also into incentives for private sector to move into these areas. I actually sit on a board of a hydro project in Cameroon. Cameroon has renewables targets. I am absolutely positive the reason this project is being given a priority is because the government has made commitments about what it will do. But what I will say about, I so agree with your comment about we have such a big vote as consumers with our pocketbooks. You know, private sector is, I don't want to say squeezed, but they get their signals from two sources, right? They get their signals from government if they're in a regulated environment, and to some extent, most private sector companies are, and they get their huge signals from us as consumers. And, you know, for the book, I interviewed a few companies that were trying to do the right thing. They said this, the pace at which they're moving. I mean, you've heard of Loop, and I hope some other people on the call have heard of Loop. Loop, when I first started giving this presentation 6 months ago, only existed in a few locations. They are now in every single state in the United States. This service is available. They're also in the UK now and in France. And I think they're expanding because, not because government is telling them, and not because they have a great idea, but because they're financed by their clients to do this, right? So we absolutely vote with our choices every single time we decide what kind of shampoo we're going to buy, for example. I see someone asked in the chat room about the different types of plastics that are accepted in grocery stores. And I want to go to that. It's such an important point. So I didn't want to spend too long on the recycling part because it's so different in different jurisdictions. But in the US, there's no area I know where you can put, there's hard plastics like that lid to the takeout container, and there's soft plastics, stretchy soft plastics like plastic bags or the dry cleaning bags. Those things that are stretchy and thin are not accepted in the recycle bins in the US. And I don't know about other countries. They are accepted in grocery stores that partner with offloaders who want that as a raw material for the building deck furniture they're making or whatever. So you have Joni Roberts has commented that, yeah, these Amazon Prime blue and white plastic mailers, they are accepted in these grocery store take back programs. Lots of things are. I have a section in my book where I list everything that you can put in those bins. It's really important because otherwise they do end up in the landfill, and that's unfortunate because they can be used for another purpose.
Wonderful. Is there any other question from the audience? Otherwise, we can do maybe another question that is what do you do when not everybody in your household is equally committed to reducing waste? And it happens in my home. I have two 24 and 22-year-olds, and sometimes they refuse to do exactly what I say about recyclables and
yeah.
And I'm such an advocate of it. I'm such an advocate of waste, and you know.
Yes, so it's a big problem, and I think we're mostly women on this call. So I will say this, and even if there's a man on the call, I'm sure he will take it in the right way. I listened to an interview recently by Tom Zaki, who's the head of Loop, and he said women are much better at this than men. I don't know why, but he said it, not me. So I am in a household of I'm the only woman in the household. There's no one, besides the fact that I wrote this book, there is no one that cares about this as much as I do. I am very skeptical about shaming my friends, my family, and my household members. I might get a little pissed off at my fiance if I've just told him yesterday where this goes and he asked me again, but I try not to be, because honestly, the fact that he's asking me means he's trying to do the right thing. So I think one thing that we can do besides not blaming is labeling things that can make things easier for people. So for example, Joni, you mentioned about the plastics that can be returned to the grocery stores. So I figured out after a while that nobody was doing the right thing in the household. So I created a little bin next to the recycle bin, and I put a big sign on it that said, you know, basically, this is for the grocery store, and here's what you can put in here. And I think, as easy as we can make it for everybody else who's not quite as fluent or as interested as we are, the more likely it will happen. But, sometimes at the end of the week, I look in the recycle bin and I have to pull things out and, put them in the right place. And I don't say anything anymore about it. I just do it.
And you say you're focused on three areas, no? Plastics, food, and recycling.
And recycling.
And what about consumers when they decide to buy like a certified organic, certified by Be Certified, or what is your take on certifications, and how do you approach it in your?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been so much greenwashing. I have I talk about this in the book. I have a bit of an allergy to the suffix able, compostable, biodegradable, recyclable. What I realize is there are a lot of labels on things that may be technically correct. But for example, if you purchase something that is compostable, but you throw it in the garbage, it will not be composted. It will go to the landfill, and the landfill does not have an oxygen-rich environment that would allow something to be composted. So first of all, I would say I'm very wary of labels of any kind. I think until there's better regulation, you have to be buyer beware, right? So there are brands that I trust more. My hierarchy is the way I think about things in my everyday life when I'm purchasing is I try to purchase local first. If I can get it at my local farmer's market, that obviously saves on the greenhouse gas emissions needed for long haul transport. If I can buy it package free, that's another way I prioritize. There are certain, locally, there are certain vendors I trust more than others because I know they've done their homework. They've given me the confidence that they've done their research. And so if I buy from them, I have more confidence. But the generic labels that I see, or maybe not generic, but the generic terms that I see on so many products, I'm quite wary of those.
Thank you. This is a great way to maybe close this call. And if you, Stephanie, want to give us just a few closing words, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting me, and I'm just so glad to take part in this with you. And what I would say is I think as we read the headlines and as we look around us, it's very easy as an individual to feel paralyzed, really easy. That's what I did my entire career, even when I was leading on climate change. And so I would just, my hope is that people feel empowered, and that if they don't do 100%, if they don't get to zero waste, but they are doing some of the things that they know can make a difference, their guilt doesn't get us anywhere. So my message is empower yourself, empower the people around you, stick with very positive messages. Enthusiasm wins hearts and minds much more than, dire statistics. That's what I've found both in my career as well as in my, journey the last couple of years on zero waste.
Well, Stephanie, this has been amazing. So Stephanie Miller, a founder of Zero Waste, you are doing an amazing job to influence many households, because I think that's where we create the change. We will create the change as consumers. On that note, I'm closing this call, but I would like to mention to you that we have 2 more webinars in January 22nd, Growing Up. I know you will think this is strange, but we believe as a Women for Solutions that we have to move forward towards a caring economy. And one of the pillars of the caring economy is care for the environment, care for the work of care. And the third one is education. And we need to educate in the proper way. And so our next webinar is called Growing Up in a Porn Culture, Harms and Solutions, because it is more than 8 years that porn is free in the world. So it's causing a lot of problems in education. And our next webinar on January the 28th is also about the fourth pillar of the caring economy, that is transparency and metrics about caring. And we will have a speaker on data-driven solutions to gender equality in the workplace. And Flory Wilson started this initiative called Gender Ideal. That means it's a self-assessment where companies can assess themselves and see where they are on their journey towards more equality or more diversity in their businesses. So on this, I would like to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you very soon in the next webinar.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.